Yes!
We're closing in on the end of Destiny 2's 9th season, and to this day, we've seen a decent amount of patches. Some weapons and abilities were buffed, some were nerfed, and some have remained relatively the same. And when it comes to weapons, it can't be denied that hand cannons are the most popular weapon type in the game, with pulse rifles being a very close second. The, at one point in time, most viable PvE primary weapon type, scout rifles also received a buff some time ago, and scout rifles as a whole have been slowly but surely finding their way into everyday loadouts. I haven't used a scout rifle in a long time, but I literally fell in love with the Patron of Lost Causes from the Nessus Obelisk. But one weapon type that we never hear much about would be auto rifles, which is no big surprise because it seems that Bungie took the same exact balancing route with auto rifles in Destiny 2 that they did in Destiny 1. You see, in year 1 of D1, most specifically the Vanilla and Dark Below eras, auto rifles were the cream of the crop. Soros Regime at one point in time was the most powerful primary weapon and was capable of some very, very scary things in the Crucible, and to a lesser extent, the archetype that it belonged to was pretty impressive as well. Now back in Destiny 1, Bungie had the very bad habit of nerfing everything into the ground, and if I recall correctly, auto rifles as a whole were slapped pretty hard. I believe there was a point in time where they were buffed, but it's safe to say that the original nerf to auto rifles in Destiny 1 changed them forever. They never felt as powerful, and Soros Regime lost its status as the most sought after and coveted exotic weapon. At one point in time in Destiny 1, there was an auto rifle known as the Doctrine of Passing that was so consistent that it was actually considered to be meta. Now this was around the April update era, which was April 2016, I believe. Yeah, it was, because it was 6 months after Destiny 1's second year kicked off. Now to this day, it's pretty unbelievable that an auto rifle has some type of competitive value when an auto rifle archetype as a whole saw significantly less use than other weapon types. This weapon was a member of the archetype that was referred to as the bullet holes archetype in Destiny 1 on account of organized weapon archetypes not existing back then. In Destiny 2 layman's terms, the Doctrine of Passing will be a 720 RPM rapid fire frame auto rifle. Doctrine of Passing was basically the Recluse of its era based on its fast time to kill, easy to control recoil, and rapid fire. But it was eventually adjusted, which was inevitable to be honest, and saw a lot less play in the Crucible. Now when Destiny 2 came out, I personally saw this as an opportunity for everything that was nerfed or adjusted in any way, shape, or form to receive a second chance. I had high hopes that Bungie would be cautious not to make the same bad decisions that they made in Destiny 1, and the first thing that I had in mind is that auto rifles would actually have some type of viability in Destiny 2. In the first 3 seasons of Destiny 2, all auto rifles were pretty viable in both PvE and PvP. I was personally a fan of the 600 RPM autos such as Skaithlock and Gallia 42, and I frequently used both of these weapons. However, the most popular archetype for PvP was undoubtedly the 450 RPM precision frame family, most notably the Uriel's Gift. And it could be debated that Uriel's Gift was about as deadly as Soros Regime was in its prime back in D1, mostly because of the range stat of the Uriel's Gift, which could be as high as 89, I believe. In fact, auto rifles as a whole had ridiculously high range and had higher range stats than all the other primary weapons in the game. Year 1 of Destiny 2 was an odd time because it's not every day where you play a game where automatic weapons have higher range than precision-oriented weapons. It didn't make sense, and eventually auto rifles received a range nerf in year 1 of Destiny 2, and the moment that this happened, a lot of other weapons started to appear in the meta. You see, what bothers me the most about Bungie as a company, and not just Destiny itself, is that automatic weapons were basically ineffective in the Halo series as well. I mean, it was different in Halo because Halo didn't have a freedom of choice factor like Destiny does. In Halos 1 and 3, everybody started off with an assault rifle and will only be able to obtain other weapons as pickups on the map. In Halo 2, the battle rifle made its debut and became the it weapon of Halo's competitive scene. In Destiny, hand cannons, pulse rifles, and scouts are adept at going straight for the head. It's easy to get headshots with these weapons because they fire semi-automatic. In Halo, automatic weapons such as the submachine gun and the assault rifle and the plasma rifle, if I'm not mistaken, were incapable of dealing extra damage by shooting somebody in the head, and were thus incapable of headshots, which is something that never made sense to me. Growing up playing the Halo games, this set a very, very bad precedent for me, and I developed a subconscious hatred for automatic weapons in every shooter game that I played after getting into the Halo series. I mean, I would use automatic weaponry in every shooter game that I played, but in the back of my mind, I always felt that they were the least effective option. After using a battle rifle in Halo 2 for the first time, I became affined to burst fire weapons, which is the derivative of my love for pulse rifles in Destiny and Destiny 2. I eventually got into other shooters such as Battlefield, a few of the Call of Duty games, and now Apex Legends, and none of these games throw automatic weapons under the bus like Destiny does. One thing I've always hated about the Destiny sandboxes, especially PvP, is the fact that only a handful of weapons are allowed to be viable at the same time. Destiny 2's PvP PvP has been stale for a long time, and at this point in time, it would throw everything for a loop if auto rifles received a buff. Now, due to the fact that precision isn't necessarily a notable characteristic of automatic weapons, it would be nice if auto rifles received an increase to body shot damage and should possess the most forgiving body shot time to kill in PvP. The obvious trade-off would be for auto rifles to have the most punishing damage fall off. I mean, realistically, any buff to auto rifles would help for both PvP and PvE, because I got a couple of nicely rolled auto rifles in my vault that I see little to no reason of using, because for one, auto rifles don't feel as powerful to me, and for two, I don't get the same feel with auto rifles in Destiny that I do with other shooter games that I spoke of previously. Auto rifles have to do a lot in order to keep up with the other weapon types, and in order for them to have some type of competitive value, auto rifles as a whole would need a boost to several of their stats. High impact autos, such as half D&D, are pretty good in the sense that they have the highest range and impact of all autos. With the right perks, it's actually really easy to obtain a range stat of 100, and I've even managed to drop a few half D&Ds and perfect from Season of the Undying with a near or max range stat. The precision frame 450 RPM family have always been viable because they have the most forgiving recoil patterns. However, I've always found it to be odd that despite the fact that precision frame autos have the best recoil patterns, their recoil direction stat isn't 100. If this archetype was to receive a targeted buff, I would like for every member of this archetype to have his recoil direction stat bumped to 100, or at least close to it. Recoil management is paramount with auto rifles, and if all precision frame autos had 100 points in the recoil direction stat, you wouldn't have to worry about using a counterbalance stock mod. Then again, I don't think that this is a mod anybody would use on a weapon from this archetype anyways, but still. 720 RPM rapid fire frame autos will probably never feel the way that they did during D1's Doctrine of Passing era on account of this archetype being very similar to submachine guns, but it would be nice if they received the stability buff. Off the top of my head, the only two 720 RPM autos that I can think of are the Foregone Conclusion and the new kid on the block, Steel Feather Repeater, which seems to be decently popular from what I've seen. 600 RPM adaptive frame autos have always been the best feeling auto rifles to me, and even though I've never been too fond of auto rifles after year one, Gamer Prime's Gnawing Hunger has always been a pretty amazing weapon in my opinion. Now, to be honest, not much has to be done with this archetype aside from a damage boost, because I've always enjoyed this archetype regardless. The Destiny community was really happy to see the return of the Monte Carlo when Shadowkeep released, and I see why, because this weapon looks and feels as amazing as it did back in D1. Also, after almost 6 years, Hard Light finally got its screen-shaking earthquake recoil pattern corrected, and ever since this happened, I've been seeing a lot more usage of Hard Light in both PvP and PvE. All in all, auto rifles need some love, and it's definitely not a secret, because let's be real, seeing spare rations and other 150 RPM hand cannons or just hand cannons in general running rampant in PvP is just boring, and I've never understood why auto rifles never stayed relevant in the long run in both Destiny games. On top of that, I never understood why every weapon type didn't at least have some form of significance in PvP, and I speak for everybody when I say this. It's to the point where I don't even get upset about getting outplayed in the Crucible, because getting annoyed with getting killed by the same weapons over and over again is a lot more of a common occurrence. It's just not fun, and it creates a sense of monotony that I'd rather avoid as a whole. That's why I barely play PvP these days, and I hope that Bungie just allows auto rifles to be great. And I don't want it to be until Destiny 3 releases for this to happen. Alright everybody, that does it for this one. In the comment section, tell me if you use auto rifles, and if you feel that they're deserving of a buff. If you made it to the end of this video and enjoyed what you watch, go ahead and thumb wrestle that like button until it turns blue. And if you're new to my neck of the woods, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel and click that bell icon so you don't ever miss a video of the most elite gaming content. But with that being stated, 1LHD is over and out. Y'all take it easy.